Welcome to my latest series, Alternative Space History. If you were with us before in the other series I had, there was unfortunately a very bad save file crash and a bunch of other things went wrong. I wasn't able to recover it, unfortunately, which is why you haven't heard from me. I've been trying to get it back for a while now, but I decided I'm just going to go ahead and start from scratch. I will be slowing down this part of the video to kind of explain a few details about RO and RP1 that I see asked a lot in our Discord and on Facebook and stuff, but firstly, we are going to be playing with no reverts on standard stock difficulty. I also have the Real Humans mod, which gives you additional missions, but we have them turned off, mostly because, in my opinion, they're kind of cheaty for early game. Like, the payouts for what you do are it's way more than it should be, and it gives you way too much of an advantage early game. But if you do end up using the same mod pack that I'm using, it's actually really nice for beginners. Either way, we're going to start off where we should start off, and we're going to go into the VAB. I'm going to use the WAC Corporal Telemetry Unit. There are two of them, a 0.3 and a 0.38 meter one. I usually use the 0.3 meter one, and I'm going to use the Procedural Tank Separate Structure. Now, there are two different types of procedural tanks. There's the service bay and there's the separate structure. Use the separate structure. The service bays cost more, and they're more for life support and other things later in the game. You can add fuel to them, but they weigh more and they cost more. They're not really worth using. Now, we're using the Aerobee engine, which is a pressure-fed engine, so that tank is attached to has to be a high-pressure tank. Adjusted the settings in there. You can kind of see it where it says HP steel tank. You need to make sure it's set to that or it will not work. Now, the top tank you can leave as a regular steel tank as long as the tank that's attached to the engine is high pressure. The other thing that's a lot of people about the RO stuff is ignition limits and burn time. We're using Test Light, the series, and for example, the Aerobee has a 47-second burn time, rated burn time. So it can burn longer than 47 seconds, but you don't want to push it too far because more than likely it will not. I usually set about 52 seconds of fuel in this first rocket. That way, if we get lucky and it can burn a little bit longer, we'll get a little more altitude and we'll be able to finish more of the pre-generated missions, which we'll talk about here in a second. The other big thing about RO, in the KSP community, people don't like clipping parts in. They think see it as cheating, especially with like fuel tanks. With RO, because of how the aerodynamic system and everything else works with the realism mods, clipping is going to be a big part of your playthrough. Like, don't feel bad about it. You see I'm going to clip these two little science units into that telemetry unit to give it more of an aerodynamic profile. Stock KSP Aero is a lot different than Realism Overhauled Aerodynamics. It's FAR Aerodynamics actually is the mod we're using. And even that little bit of surface area sticking out of the side can cause aerodynamic instability, and you don't want that. You'll also notice we're going to be using a lot of procedural parts in this particular playthrough. They are your bread and butter of RO. The wings I'm using now, the procedural wings, the best thing I can recommend with this is to kind of play around with the tool, kind of understand how it functions. You hit the J key while it's highlighted, and it will bring up that menu that I'm working with. We're going to be using something called drag wings on this particular rocket. A lot of people would recommend spin stability, and spin stability is great for sounding rockets. But for the Aerobee, the WAC Corporal knockoff, which is what we're building right now, I found drag wings work just as efficiently if you can get them set up right, and they don't give me a headache from the constant spinning. Either way, the procedural wings are going to take some time to get used to, so I just recommend to sit in the VAB and play around with them a little bit. Once you start to learn the aerodynamics, the way it works in RO, it'll be a little bit easier to understand, but it is definitely different than stock KSP. Now, when I say spin stability with sounding rockets are non-controlled rockets. We're going to launch this thing and then it's just going to go. We're not going to have any control over it. That's another thing that a lot of people don't, when they first start RO, they get a little confused with. Like in stock KSP, you have probe control and you can put a Kerbal in rocket like right away, and that's not how it works in RO. In fact, human spaceflight usually doesn't happen for a few years, unless you want to build airplanes, which we're going to attempt to on this series as well in a few years. Another key thing to keep in mind is the engines take a second to spool up, so I'm actually going to stage the Aerobee rocket with the Tiny Tim booster. That way, by the time it's fully throttled up, it will be ready to decouple. And you'll kind of see that when we actually launch this thing. RO takes a lot of practice, and there's a lot of things to get used to and adjust to. Like, for example, these engines have no throttle capability. It's full throttle or no throttle, nothing in between. That will take a little while to get used to. A few other things is the build times. These rockets don't build instantly, which we're going to be popping over to the upgrade screen in a little bit. I'll explain that a little bit more. It's a little thing I just circle my mouse with. Now, the more points you put in your VAB, the faster things build. The more points you put in your R&D, the faster things research. Everything takes time. You start off with 2 points. I usually put 2 points in the VAB, and then I'll spend the $40,000 and put 2 more points in my VAB. That way I can start turning out rockets faster, and then I'm going to start focusing on R&D after. Tooling is something else that's really important. To tool a rocket is to make it build faster, make it cost less. There's also a recolor tool, which I'm not going to really touch on too much. That's not as important. But when it comes to tooling a rocket, once you tool something, that's it. So you spend the money on it, it costs money, and then if you make too drastic of a change, you have to retool it. So there's a thing called crash. It's a test simulation in this game, which I actually do a simulation later to kind of show you how it works. Always test your rockets meticulously before you tool them, because if you tool something and then you have to fix it and then retool it, you're just wasting funds. That's something else I've noticed a few people having questions with, is the whole tooling aspect. You are going to reuse a lot of these rockets, especially the booster stages when you get into orbital flight. Typically you'll have a launch vehicle you'll build, and you'll use that launch vehicle several different times to achieve multiple different contracts. And the reason for that is to save money. The more money you can save on tooling and building, the more you can use to upgrade your VAB, R&D, or space plane hangar if you're into making planes. So it's all about balance, which again I mostly focus on R&D and VAB, so I'll keep those pretty balanced. This is me actually tooling it right now. You see the cost changes drastically, and then the build time also changes drastically. It's going to cost me just under 2,000 funds to tool this rocket, which is pretty normal. It should be about 1,800, give or take, is what you should see when you build this first rocket. So go ahead and we're going to get that building. Now I have 2 of them in queue. It's because with test light, rockets can fail, so I'm building a backup just in case. Little spoiler, we don't end up launching that. I'm just kind of going through the menus here. With the RP1, you can rename your astronauts and you can see their flight history and all that stuff. I'm not going to touch too deeply on that. First thing, go ahead and warp up to our first flight. You key things is you want to make sure your throttle is all turned up all the way, because once you stage it, it's the ignition, so you got to be careful with that. This is the Kerbalism screen. Science isn't instantaneous, it takes time. Like pressure scan takes about 10 minutes to fully complete. There's a low, a high, an orbit, low space, high space, so there's different biomes like stock KSP, but you'll be repeating experiments several times to get all of the data. It's not just a one and done like in stock. Kerbalism also comes with a lot of other challenges, but we won't be focusing on them in this episode. See here, I have no SAS control. I have no control at all actually over this rocket. So full throttle it up, make sure my staging is good, and then I'm going to hit the space bar and then hit the decoupler shortly after and shoot our first rocket as high as I possibly can. Saw a little heating thing right there. I didn't hit the space bar in time, that was on me, but as you see this rocket with the drag wings, it's going to pull all the aerodynamic force to the bottom of it, keeping it pointing pretty much straight up. We had a little bit of a wobble early on, and that sometimes happens. But you see all these contracts that just popped up that I completed. Those are those pre-generated contracts I was talking about. their altitude and speed contracts. So like, 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers. As you complete one, another one will generate after it, and it goes up to a certain point. It's not like you get them every 20k or every 10k. I think once you get past like a 200k, it's 300k, 400k, but you get a little bit of funding for each of those contracts. So I mean, those are really important to watch out as well. Main contracts are important, and you'll be doing a lot of like specific satellite contracts and stuff. But those milestone contracts will give you a nice little buffer of funds. In fact, with this one rocket we just shot, we actually get a ton of funding. I'm just going to blow it up before it hits the ground because there's no reason for it. And we're going to go ahead and pop back over to the Space Center. Now, we just got a ton of funding from that, and we got some science. So let's go ahead and start doing some research. The tech tree is obviously different. Keep in mind, like for example, the material science, you have to unlock some of those to keep going on the rocketry tree. The two main focuses early game are going to be those two I clicked, and then the avionics to get science unlocked. If you want to do airplanes, the very top is the airplane stuff, but you never actually have to touch any of this stuff if you don't want to. If you don't feel confident or want to deal with airplanes, don't worry about it. The other thing you'll notice is you unlock upgrades as well as engines. Each engine can be upgraded, which is a really nice feature with the RP1 setup. But first, let's go ahead and grab the next mission, which is the Carmen Line mission, which is over 100k. The other big difference with the RSS mod is the orbital altitude is 140 kilometers rather than 70 kilometers. It's a bit different. I usually aim for about 150 minimum. There's also these sounding rocket contracts you're going to see generate here. You can only activate one at a time. The longer these sit, the more they're worth, if that makes sense. So alternate between them. You have the downrange contracts, and then you have the altitude contracts. You'll also unlock some other ones here shortly, like the bio return contracts and the film contracts. I usually recommend doing pick an order, like I'll do a biological, a film, a downrange, an altitude, and just kind of keep that pattern going, because the longer those contracts sit, they actually become worth more money, and that's the best way to kind of get funds generated early game. By the end of this particular episode, we will be getting through the 3,000 kilometer downrange contract, which is like a big milestone. But let's go ahead and make our first sounding rocket. We're going to grab that same telemetry unit we're using, but we're going to make a slightly bigger tank. We're going to be using the RD100. That's my personal favorite one. There's a couple of options you can use. That's the one I would recommend. Now we're going to make this tank 1.25 in diameter, and there's a few reasons for that I'll touch on later. But as these are sounding rockets, we have to add a sounding payload. So we're going to use a high pressure tank on the top for our nose cone tank. And it's because the high pressure steel tanks, and it has to be the steel tank, is able to hold sounding payload. It can only do sounding payload, but again, it's cheaper than service modules. Here's the tank UI screen. And if you go to the very bottom, you will see the sounding payload, and we're going to add that to the rocket. I'm going to max it out to begin with because I want to see the full capacity of this rocket. We're going to build this rocket to be reused several times. It's not just going to be for one sounding rocket contract. I want it to be able to do like at least 10. That way I get my money's worth out of it. In real life, they would shoot the same rocket over and over again. So we just added the full capacity of sounding payload, which is a little over 500, which is pretty good. Later in the game, you start getting a lot higher numbers, but either way, we'll just kind of move on from that. We're going to put a parachute and a decoupler on this because I want to show you how the parachute system works. We're not going to leave any of this because it's not needed right now. But when you go into the quick action menu and you click on the parachute, this little menu is going to pop up. You have all these cool options. You can make it bigger, smaller, different planets, different atmospheres. You can change the material, which makes it cheaper or more expensive, but also gives it certain materials work better in certain atmospheres and heat. Silk is great to start off with, especially for early game stuff, because you're not going to be carrying super heavy payloads. The wet mass thing as well. If you have you set it up for a sounding payload, the sounding payload is going to be in there when it lands, so make sure you have that set to wet mass, because dry mass is assuming that tank got emptied, and it will not be emptied. Just a couple of things. I'd recommend kind of pausing and reading over that, because I do kind of put some text stuff in there. And then we're going to slap on this decoupler just to kind of show you how this all works. Again, the early sounding rocket contracts have no need for any of this. We will add them later, but for now we're going to be removing those shortly. I'm also going to be doing the spin stability wings, which I like to use a high point wing like I'm setting up here now. And then you're going to use the rotate tool, and you want to hold down shift when you do it because you need a very small turn, which you'll see me kind of go back and forth showing the difference between the turn jump. So I have snap on, and if I hold down shift, it'll do just a small turn, just like that. I actually like to do a little less than that myself, so I just do it without snap on. But we're also going to go ahead and do it without holding shift, and you're going to see it's going to jump a lot more, and that's way too much. There are some mods that help with that. That was the big turn I was talking about. But I just usually use non-snap and just very lightly drag it over until I'm happy with it. But that's going to basically cause the rocket to spin, and when the rocket spins, it will keep it on its projected course. This rocket is going to be used for two things. It's going to be used for altitude contracts and downrange contracts, which we'll go over here in just a second. I probably could have balanced this rocket better, but you do want to have that blue circle a little bit below early, because it will cause some weird instability. We're going to be using this, I think it's the TK8 clamp decoupler. This makes it really easy to reuse this rocket for multiple contracts, which you'll kind of see me do in a little bit. We're about to do the crash simulation. I'm going to show you how to set that up here in a second, and then we're going to go ahead and launch it the way it is, and I'm going to go ahead and take the parachute stuff off, and then we're going to come back and finalize everything. Now down here in the little sim box, you're going to click it, and you're going to see all these numbers. You want to change these all to 0. I have a preset custom one, which glitched for some reason, but I fix it later. It costs money to do the simulations, especially if you're new to this game. It takes a lot of practice to learn everything, and it will just drain all of your funds just doing simulations. So just set these to 0. Everyone does it. No one's gonna make fun of you. Just make sure you set them all to 0. Accept it. Accepting it's important. You need to hit accept. And I just save a custom one that's just _0. That has all the stuff preset for me, and then that will make the sim cost be 0. This sometimes glitches out, which it did to me. You'll see it's going to cost me like 36 funds or whatever, and I just didn't want to deal with it at the time. I do fix it later. But this is the crash screen. There's a bunch of options, but we're just going to go ahead and use it from the launch pad. I'm going to make a couple of real small adjustments here before we launch this. More or less just kind of clipping this in and putting these science experiments on there so I don't forget, because I've done that in the past. Again, we do need to reuse the science experiments to get all of the science from them. And then when you clip, sometimes it gives you this weird little edging thing, and you kind of got to go through and adjust some stuff, and it's kind of annoying, but either way, I just kind of sped this part of the footage up. And then we're going to go ahead and launch this via simulation. Now you'll see the little simulation active thing pop up here. That means you're in the simulation stage. Anything that happens here doesn't matter. You can revert it. It will show contracts that get completed, but they won't actually be completed. They won't actually matter in the real game. Now these RD100 engines take a second to wind up. So you see that current throttle. You want to wait until that says 100 before you release the clamp, or it can just fall over, as I'm doing here. Now you're going to notice this rocket's going to slowly start to spin, and then it's going to really start to generate a spin, and that's what's going to keep it stable. Too much spin is bad, not enough spin is also bad. So you need to kind of find the balance. I'm going to go ahead and speed this part of the launch up because it's sort of tedious watching it just go up and straight down. But we'll be able to see kind of what the potential of our rocket is at max payload, and see exactly what kind of contracts it can complete. You can also look at all the individual stuff like the high-low if you just click on the little blue paper tab in the Kerbalism screen. That's completely up to you. I just kind of wanted to show you that the option is available. But this rocket got us pretty high up in the air, and for being our first main sounding rocket, it's actually really overbuilt, which is what we want, because we want to use this rocket for the next few years, making small adjustments to it. I'm just checking the aerodynamic pressure, make sure the cone module won't blow up due to heat. And yeah, that's all we were really doing. Now, we're going to pop back over to the screen because this is the mission we're going to do. And I want to touch back on that you can only do one at a time. I'm kind of circling that whole it's worth more money the longer it sits type thing. You can't see it in these screens, unfortunately, because it locks them all out once you select one. But just keep in mind you're going to want to jump between the different contracts each time you do them, just so you can get the most funding out of it. I hope that's enough explanation. I tried explaining that to someone before, like over Discord, and it didn't make a lot of sense, so I figured I'd just kind of show it. And we're going to pop back over to the VAB for just a second so I can show you the 4% rule. Now when it comes to tooling, you can make plus or minus 4% changes without having to retool. Which you're going to see, I'm just going to kind of move these around a little bit, and you'll see how that kind of changes, you know, tool tank, and then when tooled, and just kind of adjust it back and forth. It's very minute changes, but if you need to get like just a little more monopropellant out of something, or a little more life support, that could be really handy in the long run. So I would really recommend playing around a lot in the VAB with the tooling function, just to kind of see the differences and what works best for you. Again, you want to make the rocket longer when you upgrade the engine rather than wider, at least in the beginning, because making the rocket wider does cost a lot more to tool. Like, if I'm correct, to go like up 0.2 sizes, it's like 6,000, but to make it like a meter longer, it's only like 1,000 funds, give or take. I kind of played around with this, but yeah, I get when in doubt, stretch it out. That's always the joke I make. Anyways, we're gonna set these up on our plans list. What you see me doing here, it's a little plans tab, and then we're gonna grab the rotate tool and just slightly rotate this rocket over. And now we have a downrange sounding rocket. Simple as that. I do test this off the screen. I didn't want to bore you guys with so many test screens, but this rocket does do what I want it to do. But yeah, so once you do that, you can come over here to the plans tab, and then you'll see those rockets listed. You can just simply click it, and it will change. Now that we're confident we have a good sounding rocket, we're going to go over to the upgrade screen. We're going to basically spend the rest of our money on upgrade points. I like to give myself a little bit of wiggle room, so about 20k is what I'll leave. There's maintenance costs and stuff you have to watch out for as well. But you see, as I upgrade the VAB, these things will start to research faster, which is what you want to focus on early. You want to make sure your rockets build fairly quickly, and then once they're kind of at a decent build speed, just focus on R&D. I'm just going to kind of layer my rockets out so I can bounce between contracts. You always want something building. Now, I clicked the edit button. I kind of wanted to show you how this works. Unfortunately, this isn't done at all, so it's still at 0%. But you can make small changes. So like, let's say you only had 160 units of sounding payload in this rocket, but the contract you're going to do needs 180 units. You can come in here and adjust that real fast and then save the edit, and then it will just adjust that one rocket. If you make the rocket any bigger, you'll have to retool it, obviously, but I just kind of threw something on there real fast just for the heck of it. But you see it adds more build days to it. That's sort of how the edit thing works. Save edit, that's very important. If you don't save it, it won't save the edit, and then you'll launch the wrong rocket. But like, I could adjust the sounding payload and save it real fast just for the contract. It's a very nice tool to have. Either way, we're going to go ahead and just warp up and get our next Draco rocket on the launch pad, and we're going to go ahead and actually launch something this time. I did cut out the very end of this launch because it was really not needed. Once you hit the altitude thing, the contract's complete, and I just kind of blew the rocket up and just cut that out. Either way, we're just going to kind of times 4 through a lot of this because it's pretty boring to watch it just fly straight up. Make sure all of our science is running, make sure everything looks good, and then once we complete this, we're going to pop back over to the Space Center, and we're going to do our first suborbital trajectory rocket. Normally I don't get this lucky, and I'm not at this point yet, but we're going to grab another sounding rocket contract, a downrange one to be specific, because it goes well with this suborbital contract. We're going to edit our downrange Draco rocket, and we're going to add a parachute and a decoupler to it. The reason for that is, with this milestone contract, you basically just have to aim a rocket downrange, get into space, and recover it. I've talked to a few people that think it's like a lot more complicated than that, but it's not really. You just need, I think it's 160 kilometers is what you need to break past to get a suborbital trajectory, and all suborbital means is launch it in a path that's going orbital, so I'm getting into space downrange. That's all that means. It's actually a really easy contract to complete. So we just made those edits. We're gonna pop over and spend some more research points because we got some from the last launch. And then we're gonna get ready to go ahead and do that next launch so we can do the suborbital contract. I cut part of this launch out because I had a really weird lag thing happen, and it was like nauseating to watch. Like the camera was spinning around in circles for some reason, but there was no cheating, I promise. It was just kind of a weird thing, and I didn't want to give you guys a headache. But we got that rocket built. We're gonna roll it out to the launch pad and get ready to launch it. It's basically the same steps as the last time. We're gonna ignite the stage, let it get to 100. We're gonna go ahead and decouple it and just kind of let it launch. This little flight planner or flight recorder unit in MechJeb 2 is super nice to have because it kind of tells you how far downrange you've actually achieved. So when you're testing rockets, I recommend using that. But pretty much we're just going to kind of fly on this suborbital path. We're going to let it come back down through the atmosphere, slow down, and pop the parachute and land it in the water. And that's it. That's the whole contract. It's really not that complicated, I guess you should say. And after this, we are going to get ready to do the downrange 3,000 kilometer milestone. You need to unlock the first level of aluminum tanks, and you need to unlock the first RD. What's RD 101 is what it's called, the RD 100 rocket, which is the first 2 tabs that we selected before. That's all you need to get this contract done. So real quick, I wanted to also show you that when you do that suborbital contract, you unlock the low film and the biological sample contract, which are worth a lot more. And all you got to really do is take that suborbital contract rocket we just used and slap a camera or a biological sample unit on it and just launch it and do the same thing we just did. And those give you a lot of funding it's relatively easy. And then you have the other 2 Draco series that we can use for sounding contracts to get more funds. But again, that's why we left this at 1.25 meters, because that's the diameter of the camera. And that parachute we have is more than enough to be able to land this payload, and the aerodynamic speed we're going to be coming through isn't high enough to actually blow the camera up because of the angle. We're not going too high and we're not going too fast. Now, later down the series, when you start getting really fast sounding rocket contracts, orbital re-entry it's spicy. It's a lot of heat and it's not good. You blow a lot of things up, so you really need to make sure you get heat shield unlocked before you try to do orbital returns. Anyways, we're just going to pop over here and we are going to basically build that downrange rocket. Now there's 2 things you can do here. You can make a really long, skinny Aerobee rocket like the Watt Corporal we did before. We're going to be using the upgraded variant of the Aerobee, which is click the engine button and then pay the $1,000 to upgrade it. This has lower burn time, but it has a lot more delta V packed in that lower burn time. As you see, it makes the rocket kind of long and skinny, and I'm not a big fan of that, so I'm actually going to switch over to the Watt Corporal 0.38 meter diameter telemetry unit, and we're going to make it a 0.38 diameter rocket. It will cost a little more to tool, but it makes it a little bit of a shorter profile, which I prefer. And the way I do this is a little weird. I'm going to put 52 seconds of burn time in a rocket that only has a 40 seconds rated burn time. It's kind of a risky thing. The end goal is you need to have 6,000 meters a second in the whole rocket to make this work. But we're basically just going to slap that Watt Corporal rocket on top of the Draco rocket we've been using, and we're just going to kind of do a 2-stage downrange rocket like I'm doing now. You can make the bottom stage bigger and have it do a more brunt of the burn. This is just how I do it. When you upgrade that RD 101, you get like an extra 15 seconds of burn time. I'm only going to use 5 seconds of it. You can make this bottom rocket a little bit bigger if you'd like, and then make the Aerobee engine a shorter burn time. That's up to you, as long as you have about a little over 6,000 meters of delta V in the end build, and we're going to kind of angle it. You want to sit and crash and kind of go back and forth. This is the final angle we're going to be going with here. I tested a few different angles in crash. I wanted to make sure this thing can do at least 4,000. That way if the Aerobee does burn out early, we still have a chance of completing the contract. We're going to go ahead and spend a little bit more money on upgrades, and we're going to get ready to do the downrange contract right now. Now, I slowed part of this down because with the aerobee, again, you have to have some kind of push on it to get it to work right. So we are going to ignite that stage about 2 seconds before the first stage is done burning. You'll see a little fire show pop up when I do this, but it's because we need to make sure that aerobee is pressure fed. So once you get to like the last 2 seconds of burn time, you want to go ahead and stage the next thing, and then stage the decoupler, and it should break free just like mine did. I would practice that and crash a little bit because the timing is a little crucial, but at this point, as long as this rocket burns through at least 90% of its fuel, we will be able to complete the contract. Now, this did go a little higher up than I wanted it to. I was having issues with aerodynamic getting too hot, being at a more of an angle, so this angle worked best for me. You're going to see here in just a second, we're going to complete that contract. We've already passed the 3K range, and we haven't even hit the atmosphere yet. This is super overbuilt for what it is. We got lucky with getting that full burn time. That may or may not happen for you. Anyways, we're going to get like $250,000, and we're going to kind of make some small adjustments. We're going to make the biological rocket, which is, again, just moving the camera and clipping it into that top piece, and then we're just going to use the same thing. Like that's all the changes we're making. It's not drastic. It won't cost us any money to tool. We're good to go. I checked with a few engine upgrades, and I just left this with the RD100 because that's all we needed. I called it the flycatcher because I couldn't think of a name. But yeah, you'll see me kind of messing with the tanks and stuff, and I did upgrade that to an aluminum tank for weight purposes. It's not really needed. This should be able to do at least the first 2 of the 3 biological contracts by itself. Play around and crash. Like, you really want to play around and crash. Now, because of all the upgrade points I managed to get, I am actually going to be able to do one more launch this year. And I didn't think I was going to be able to, but I want to talk about the satellite contracts. These have a time limit on them. You get a bunch of funding, but if you accept them too early, you will lose all that funding when the advance fails. Please wait until you feel confident in doing an orbital launch before accepting those. You can definitely use the funding to buy the parts you need. Just don't do it too early because you can screw yourself later in the game. We're going to go ahead and launch the Aperture 1, which is just our camera version of the Draco Downrange. And it's going to collect us some science. 1 and 2 is going to wrap us up that contract so we get a little more funding. But that is going to be the last launch of this year. We got a lot accomplished this year. We managed to get the suborbital done. We got the downrange contract by the end of the first year. We have a really great sounding rocket going. We have plenty of funds. We have a decent upgrade system. We are on a very good path. Again, with Test Light, you may not get as lucky, and if you are newer to the game, I recommend having reverts on so you can revert a flight when that happens. That's totally up to you. This first episode was kind of a sort of a guide for new players to RO to kind of explain how some of the things work, things I wish I knew when I first started playing RO, and stuff like that. You don't have to listen to anything I'm saying. I just figured I'd slow the beginning of this down to kind of help you guys out, those of you who watch the videos, especially if you want to start playing RO. We're just going to kind of go ahead and grab our next sounding rocket contract. This is not going to be shot until next year, which will be coming out soon. And we're just going to kind of warp up until we get to the very end of 1951. I overshoot it a little bit, but not bad. But yeah, we got all the goals I wanted to achieve this year. We got the downrange 3K contract, suborbital contract. We got ourselves some decent R&D. We got ourselves some nice upgrades, a little bit of pocket change. Everything went really nice. We are on a very good path to be able to getting orbital by the year 1954, which is sort of what I'm going to try and show you guys how to do. If you don't make it by 1954, don't feel bad. I mean, I've been playing RO for a decent amount of time. I've been playing KSP for even longer. But either way, we're just going to kind of warp until we're at the end of the year, and I'm going to go ahead and call that an episode. So thank you guys for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed the content, and I hope I will see you guys in our next episode, which will be the year 1952.